Welcome to Ledges State Park. For some of you, this may be the first time here. For others, I'm sure you've been here many times, and that's why you're here today. I'm going to introduce the speakers up here. First of all, myself, I'm Mark Plymale, the park ranger. I've been here since July of 1994. I arrived just in time to do some cleaning up of the 93 flood. Also, we have Michael Carrier. He's the administrator for Parks, Recreation, and Preserves Division of the DNR. Jim Scheffler, who is executive officer for the Parks Program Administration Bureau. And Vern Condon, who is a long-time resident of Boone, grandson, of Carl Fritz Henning, and also Bobby Fritz Henning, who came all the way up from Alabama to be involved in the ceremony. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Michael Carrier, Division Administrator for Parks, Recreation, and Preserves.
Thanks, Mark. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming out here today and showing your support and appreciation for Ledges State Park. I want to make a couple of introductions. Representative Mike O'Brien is here today. Mike, where are you? I'm going to say a few other words about Mike a little later in my presentation, but Mike, I'm pleased that you're here and thank you for your support and attendance. Iowa State Parks are one of Iowa's best kept secrets. We have over 83 state parks and recreation areas all over the state. Many of those are a legacy of the Civilian Conservation Corps, the Works Progress Administration, and dedicated people like Carl Fritz Henning and the early Board of Conservation who labored to create the kind of parks and recreation areas that we have in Iowa that provide opportunities for over 13 million visitors every year. As I said, it's one of Iowa's best kept secrets. As much as we love Ledges, which I think is an excellent representation of our state park system, we have many others that are equally beautiful and equally enjoyed as Ledges. Mark, you've done a good job here with this reconstruction. We appreciate the habitat and the little artificial wetland you created in front of the patio here, but it certainly is much more desirable than the wetland that we had located the shelter in for a number of years. But Mark, I want to express my appreciation to you for all that you've done to make this project come together and make today come together and provide this opportunity for all these folks to share with us in this rededication of the park and the 75th anniversary celebration of Ledges. The second introduction that I hope to make, and I'm glad that I can make it, is a late arrival, and that gentleman walking in and his wife, that is Leonard Woodruff, the owner of Woodruff Construction, who relocated and reconstructed this beautiful lodge. Leonard, thank you for coming today. I'm glad you can make it. As I said, so many of these state park facilities are the legacy of programs like the Civilian Conservation Corps, the Works Progress Administration, and the early efforts of conservationists and park and recreation professionals in Iowa. And one of the most gratifying things for me as a professional and people like Mark and Jim and the others that work with us is to be able to, at long last, not only restore many of these facilities that were left behind 60 and 70 years ago for us to enjoy, not only to restore them to their original condition, but in many cases to actually enhance them over what they were when they were originally constructed. And there was a long time where we didn't have the funds to do that. But in recent years, through the efforts of legislators like Mike O'Brien and others in the legislature, we have funds now from the Iowa Infrastructure Fund and from the REAP Fund to restore, repair, and enhance our state parks and recreation areas. The most recent program that we've been benefited by is one called Restore the Outdoors, which was a 4-year program providing $3 million a year to reconstruct and repair park facilities. We put our emphasis with that money on restoring the oldest facilities. Many of them are now very historic, like this shelter. Many of them were built by the Civilian Conservation Corps and WPA, and most now are on the National Register of Historic Places. They are so significant. So it's so gratifying to have the funds from the Restore the Outdoor program to do this work and to see you folks out here enjoying it today. Again, I want to express my appreciation to all of you for coming today, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the program and have an opportunity to share some reminiscences with all of us as we examine and enjoy and appreciate this beautifully restored shelter. Thank you.
Next up, we have Jim Scheffler, who's the executive officer with the Parks Program Administration Bureau, and he's going to talk a little bit about the CCC and WPA, which actually built this shelter back in 1935, along with the Stone Bridge in the canyon, many of the trails and other things that you see in the park. So, Jim?
Thanks, Mark, and morning, everybody. And I'll echo Mike's comments about the tremendous effort that was done at this facility. Several years ago, I think almost everyone had written off this facility, but because of the foresight of a number of people in the DNR and in the community, our inspector, Larry Taylor, of our Construction Services Bureau, and a fine craftsman-like company like Woodruff Construction, we can now see that we've preserved this legacy for future generations to enjoy. I want to talk a little bit about the Civilian Conservation Corps and the Works Progress Administration. These were among the alphabet programs of the Franklin D. Roosevelt administration, 1932, the New Deal, CCC, WPA, the NRA, National Recovery Act, the TVA, Tennessee Valley Authority. All of these intended to provide meaningful work for Americans, to put America back on the track to recovery, to do, again, meaningful things for the citizens of the country. Between 1933 and 1942, 2.5 million young men aged 17 to 28 worked in the Civilian Conservation Corps camps throughout the United States, planting trees, building terraces, fighting forest fires, and working in national, state, and city parks. Thanks to Iowa's foresight, the CCC was able to hit the ground running. In the early 30s, a group of pioneering conservationists in Iowa, people like Ding Darling and Aldo Leopold, had crafted the 25-year conservation plan, which was a landmark document not only in Iowa but nationally. And it provided a framework of action so that when the CCC and WPA came into effect, they were able to get going right away in Iowa. By mid-1933, 16 CCC camps were in place in the state, and 32 projects were approved. In Iowa, there were 46 CCC camps in total, and 41 of these worked in state parks. I think 43 state parks had significant CCC activity. By 1940, over $5 million had been spent on state park work, and those are 1940 dollars. You can imagine what $5 million, compared to today would be worth. This represented the greatest burst of development in state park history. At Ledges, we had several camps active. Company 780, based in Boone, which was a U.S. Forest Service sponsored company, worked from June 4th, 1933 to November 8th, 1933. And then Company 2723, which was a National Park Service company, worked from August 29, 34 to April 1936. After that, records get a little hazy. Apparently, an unnamed company worked briefly in 1937 and crafted the beautiful footbridge you see in the canyon. Mark mentioned some of the things which the CCC constructed in this park. The entry portals, including the check station up at the north entrance, trails, trail markers, footbridges, vehicle bridges and fords, the dam at Lost Lake, riverbank stabilization, the Oakwoods picnic shelter up above in the picnic area, 2 cabins that are no longer present, and its beautiful lower shelter and concession building. Many of these facilities have been determined to be eligible for the National Register of Historic Places, which is a high honor. And most of these facilities, including this one, were designed by famed landscape architect and designer John Fitzsimmons at Iowa State College. The WPA didn't have a lot of involvement at ledges. My records indicate that they primarily were involved in some brush clearing and landscape work. But in other places, like upstream at Delaware State Park, they did significant work. The CCC did a tremendous amount of work in the short time it was at ledges. It's hard to imagine any type of government program accomplishing so much in such a quick span of time. And in their spare time, they also had a rather enjoyable camp life. One of the purposes of the CCC was not only to put young men to work, but also to provide educational background, because many of these people didn't have even a high school degree. So working with the Boone High School and 5 local teachers, 25 subjects were taught to the young men in the CCC. I found the other day that the camp had a popular singing quartet that actually was heard on radio, probably out of Des Moines, and also live throughout the central Iowa region. They had 2 champion boxers and a basketball team. The DNR is working hard to preserve the legacy of the CCC. Mike talked about the Restore the Outdoors program, and we do have some colorful new handouts available on this. We're real proud of the work that's been done not only at Ledges but elsewhere. At Ledges, we have restored the Oakwood shelter up above, and if you haven't already seen that one, take some time today to look at it. And since 1980, we've done a lot of very intensive work on the trail system to bring that back up to the standards of the CCC in the 30s. The Fritz Henning Memorial Shelter represents a special achievement. As I had intended, a lot of us, myself included, had pretty much written this off. But now, thanks to going the extra mile, we have a beautiful shelter, a beautiful living legacy to the Civilian Conservation Corps. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. I'm going to talk a little bit about Ledges State Park. However, I'm not going to bore you with dates and time frames and things like that. There's actually a wealth of historical knowledge sitting amongst you. Harold Adams, who's a longtime resident of the Boone area and the Ledges area, worked down at the wildlife exhibit for, I think, 18 years? 16, okay. I was close. But some of the things and dates that are important in the history of the park, the state park system was actually adopted into law in 1917. That formed what would eventually be Iowa State Parks. In 1918, there was 500 acres of land, actually a portion of behind where you're sitting now and up above that eventually became the wildlife exhibit, was acquired and was put into a wildlife preserve area. In 1921, the state acquired more land for the park, and as you know, 1924, Ledges was officially dedicated as a state park. At that time, it was approximately 900 acres. Since that time, we've grown to 1,200 acres, and we've experienced some difficulties. I'm sure you're all aware of the flooding problems that we have. That's something that's been going on for years and years. The water does seem to last a little longer in the pool than it used to. But one thing to look at that most people probably don't realize is that you're in probably one of the most unique parks in the state right now. And there's a little story behind that Mike knows about. We talked about the other day. I had a lady call from Boston 2 weeks ago, and her and her family were on their way to Nevada for vacation and had read about the Ledges in the American Almanac and RV Camping Guide. So they had planned on staying here. So she was calling and asking about the facilities, and I told her about the beautiful campground with the spacious electric sites and the nice natural borders in between the non-electric sites, and the playground in there for the kids, and the canyon trails, and the attraction that was. And she proceeded to ask me if we had a lake. Well, I told her, this year we have a lake. Hopefully next year we won't. I don't think she quite understood what I was saying, so I had to elaborate a little bit more on that. But there have been some disappointments and tough things to deal with the high water problems that we have. It keeps the canyon closed usually for an extended period of time. On a year like this, we've only been open 8 days since April 1st, and it looks like we're going to be closed down for quite a while longer this summer, the way it's looking. But on the positive side of that, which I'm sure is hard for most people to see, is it does give the canyon area time to heal. With the amount of use it gets on an average year when we're dry, there's approximately 400,000 people go through this park. So it does get an awful lot of use. Even though the canyon itself is not available to vehicle traffic, it is still available for people to walk on the trails and hike down in the canyon and enjoy it then. It's a nice, peaceful time. Naturally, because there's not a whole lot of people down there, but you can hear the birds singing and the kids playing the crossings, and there's no concern for the vehicles going through where they have to get out of the way here and there. But it is a very popular area, even on years like this. I can remember when I was first informed that I was going to be the park ranger here, I was, and my family was extremely excited to come to a park with a reputation of ledges. I think my first reaction was, wow, I'm going to ledges. And when we got up here, I hadn't been here for several years, nor had I seen the flooding damage that was done in '93. I can remember driving down through the canyon with the previous ranger that retired shortly before I got here, and you couldn't see over the silt out of the vehicle windows driving through the canyon. Well, my reaction again was, wow, I'm not sure I made the right decision. But it's since been cleaned up. King Construction did the work in the lower portion of the canyon, which was actually devastated the most, had the most silt left behind, and hopefully we won't have to go through that this year. I'm counting on the water receding here shortly. The biggest thing that's taken place since the canyon cleanup that I think is most significant is the relocation of the shelter. It's a beautiful facility. It's something that everyone can appreciate and use now. We don't have to worry about the water getting in it anymore. And before I'm done here, I'd like to, I know Mike mentioned thanking me for the efforts involved in this, but I would like to thank the crew that spent an awful lot of extra hours this week to get things ready for this event. I know when the time came that we were out of time and we had done all we could do, even though there was more to do, there was a big sigh of relief, and I think they're looking forward to next week. It won't be any easier. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce Bobby Fritz Henning, who is the grandson of Carl Fritz Henning, and I'm sure he has some good stories about his grandfather, and I'm glad we could get the shelter back into shape and get it usable for everyone again. Thank you.
Thank you. I've been asked to say a few words about the early life and accomplishments of my grandfather. I can tell you that he was born in Schleswig-Holstein on March the 14th, 1865, to Henry Rudolph and Anna Dorothea Henning. Just 2 months later, they left Germany and sailed on the ship Electric, sailing ship, to come to New York, and it took them a week to go to the Mississippi River on an overland schooner, which stopped at the Mississippi River, and they had to go across the ferry, which they didn't have money to pay the toll, and a kind lady sold the story, and this is all documented in the Boone County History volume, that she loaned him 75 cents to go across this ferry, and Mr. Henning got over in Davenport and worked long enough to pay off the loan and to also save up enough money to come to Boone. And why Boone? Because it was the end of the road there at the end of the Chicago Northwestern tracks. And I think his sponsor before him had come to this area. Mr. Henning, when he got off the train, saw a need for providing food and coffee, and he built a little oven and sold coffee and bakery goods. And over the next 5 years, gained enough money to buy a bakery himself and to have another son, a younger brother of Carl, and his name was Adolf. Now, during this time also, Mr. Henning was going to the early school system in Boone, and he graduated at an early age and helped work in the bakery. While he was working in the bakery, a young lady from Germany came over, and she was a housekeeper. And in one of Carl's diaries, that's in the museum here, the Boone County Museum, he has this notation in there. She was as sleek and trim and pretty as the sailing vessel that brought us over to this country. And needless to say, they had a very short courtship, and he married her. And during that time, his younger brother was kind of sickly, and he died, unfortunately, in the year of 1900 in March. And then Mr. Henning, Carl's father, died 6 months later. Adolf died from pneumonia, and Mr. Henning died of heart disease. And this kind of closed their store. Mr. Henning, before he had the bakery, before he died, had expanded his bakery and grocery business, and Carl had gone to work for J.C. Peterson Company in Boone, and he was a bookkeeper, and he was a business manager for the store, and Mr. Henning called him back to the bakery. So Carl then helped out, and they expanded into a grocery and delicatessen. He worked there several years, and when he went to work for Mr. Olmsted in the clothing business, because they closed the bakery in 1900. He left that to become clerk of court in Boone. On the Democratic ticket, he was reelected in 1910, and in 1912, after his mother died, he opened up his own delicatessen, his own bakery and grocery, and kept this until he was appointed the first custodian of the Ledges State Park in 1921. Now, one might say, how in the world did he have time to do all of this and still find time to learn ornithology, write bird books, paint, draw, do taxidermy, and learn meteorology? His greatest interest had always been the outdoors, and during the time that he worked at these other places, J.C. Peterson, the bakery, you could see this might have been the problem with his work record. He would take off and come down to these parts known as the Ledges now, and he did bird writing. Grandma used to sit and tell us after she came to live with us after he died, how he would take off for a couple of days, and he always hoped that he would make enough money out of his writing of bird books to pay for the expense money that he took on his trips, and she said it never happened. From reading his diaries, one can see that he was an ardent naturalist, an ornithologist. He was an expert taxidermist. He was a member of the Iowa Ornithology Union, the Iowa State Historical Society, the American Meteorology Society, the Audubon Society, the American Forest Association, and the Iowa Conservation Association. And it was his love for his old haunts at the Ledges which led to his zealous effort to get the State Department of Parks to establish a state park at the Ledges. His diaries attest to his beloved Ledges, that his heart was in his work. He gave his all to make the Ledges State Park one of Iowa's finest parks, and I think he would be so proud to know that this commissary, that we used to call it, or another one was a concession stand, that would be named for him. It's so fitting, as it was one of the best known buildings in the park. This is where visitors would always say, they ask if you knew where the commissary building or the concession stand, and everybody said they did. This is where you plan to meet your friends. So I think it's so fitting. I'm just proud to be a part of this day, and I'm proud for the people of Iowa that they have preserved this park. I know he'd be real proud. Thank you. I'd like to introduce now Vernon Condon. Vernon and I used to roam the woods here with Ted out here, Bernice, my Uncle Lou Jones.
Thank you, Bob. First of all, I want to tell you about Grandpa was a Democrat, and getting elected in Boone County at that time, which was predominantly Republican, was quite a feat, and he served 2 terms. So I thought he did very well. Well, they asked me to say a few words about when we was out here in the ledges. Remember, we were just small boys. And we used to walk out here at the ledges from home because we didn't have a car. We'd walk out here in the morning on Sunday morning and go back Sunday night about 5 o'clock. My brother Ted would always pick up a couple pumpkins on the way back in the fall. We didn't make jack-o'-lanterns out of them, we had them. And then in the summertime, when the 1st of June had come, we just couldn't wait to get back out here with Grandpa. Ted and I and Bob. And we spent literally days exploring the trails, playing cowboy and Indian and soldier and different games. We'd get lost occasionally, and we spent a lot of time building dams in the creek. Well, heck, now 40 miles south here, they got a big dam. And I looked at all the damming we used to do, and they got a big one down there. And then on Sundays, it was extremely busy here. Grandpa'd have us go down and write all the license plates down the cars. 77 Polk County, 85 Story County, 35 Franklin, 8 Boone. We'd write them all down, and then the different states. Then we'd go to the little cabin. He had a little cabin right back there by the creek, full of mounted animals, birds, butterflies, all different insects, anything to do with nature. And then we'd have the people sign the guest register when they come in. But this place we're standing in right now this was heaven. Because if we could mow Grandma's lawn, it'd take 2 of us. Had a real lawnmower and it was dull. And we'd push that around the lawn. And Grandpa, when we ate supper, have a nickel under our plate. We couldn't wait to beat it down here, right down there. I always got Pepsi-Cola because there's 12 ounces and the rest of that pop in them days was 6, Dr. Pepper. They always said Pepsi-Cola hits the spot, 12 full ounces, that's a lot. Twice as much for a nickel, too. Hey, Pepsi-Cola's a drink for you. Well, then when we'd get done writing when have people come into the little cabin, we'd beat it up to the zoo, 4 o'clock. That's when they fed the animals. And Grandpa was always dressed up really sharp. Now you want to remember one thing. He didn't do that. Grandma polished his shoes. She polished his leggings. She pressed his pants. She pressed his shirts and his jacket. She polished badge number 60 that went on his coat and on his hat. Not with an electric iron, off the range, and it was 80 degrees out. She was fire in that range every day, and Grandma used it. And so we'd go to the zoo. The first thing on the agenda was the deer. And Grandpa would call Malibu and Queenie. They were 2 fat deer, and they'd look up and they'd come down from the deer range, and Grandpa feel around his pocket, give them a lump of sugar. The deer would turn sideways, and the little kids put their hand, touch a real live deer, because back then there wasn't the abundance of deer that there is now. And also Grandpa started the first 2 deer, Babe and Buck, and they've produced a lot since then. But Babe and Buck were their first 2. And then Malibu and Queenie come down, people touch them, that was a thrill. And the next stage would be 2 black bear, and then he'd run into the coyotes, and he'd turn to somebody and say, would you like to hear the coyotes howl? And of course they'd say, yes. Grandpa would say, Silver, Fang, come. And they'd come up and get on top of the den. Grandpa would put his head back and howl like a coyote, and pretty soon they'd start howling, and then Grandpa would go to the next one, a timber wolf. He'd say, Lobo, sing. And the timber wolf would sing, and then pretty soon that just go right down the line. The birds and the fox would bark, and all down that, the badgers would come out of the den. And as Grandpa walked down that line, people were just like magnets to him, and he'd tell them stories of the animals and the birds, and that zoo was one of the better zoos around this part of the country. And then one day I went back home back up the house of me, We had running water, run out of the door and run across the road and got the water. But at any rate, I went out back to the house and I told Grandma, I said, I'm going to cross the road, get a drink of water with a cup. Most of the time we just drank out of our hand, pumped it. She said, you be careful, mitt the cup. I said, okay. So I went over there and I was pumping and throwing the water up in the air and just horsing around. I looked down. I seen 2 high heels standing there. And I looked up. There's a gal about 6.5, 7 foot tall standing right now. She said, little boy, can I have a drink of water out of that cup? I said, well, before I left the house, Grandma told me, don't you let anybody drink out of that cup. And I said, well, why, certainly you may. And I got her a drink of water, and then I looked up and she had lipstick on. You didn't wear lipstick in those days, not in that house. So I gave her the drink. She gave me the cup back. She said, little boy, can I have another drink? I said, well, if you don't put too much lipstick on it. But I said, absolutely. So I give it to her and I handed her the cup so she'd drink out of the same side of the cup. She turned it around, drank off the other side. She handed me the cup back. She said, thank you. And I said to myself, yeah, thanks a lot. And so, at any rate, I thought about going down the creek and washing it in the creek, but nah, that might scratch it. So I grabbed some weeds and wiped it off and finished it off with my shirt tail. Went up to the house, went right into the kitchen, and Grandma always had a bar of P&G or felt naphtha laying on the counter. I grabbed that P&G and I grabbed it, and Grandma said, what Mick you been doing out there, Vernon? She couldn't say Vernon, she said Vernon. And I said, nothing, Grandma. And she said, you get in here and sit with me for a little bit. I said, okay, Grandma. So I went in the other room, sat down. And then at night, we'd sit on the summer porch in the house up there. And a deer would come in the yard, and rabbits, and all kinds of game. Grandpa would say, hurry, get the salt shaker. We'd beat it out in the kitchen, get the salt shaker. He'd say, now, put some in your hand. Get out there and throw it on that rabbit's tail, see if you can catch it. That guy sneak through the yard, get up there, throw the salt out, and then try to jump on him. Of course, we'd never catch him. That was good entertainment for Grandpa. And at night, Grandma had that Aladdin lamp in the dining room. Grandpa had a gas lantern in his library, and the library was naturally all 4 walls were just covered with books. Bob and Ted, they read nature books. I always grabbed the war books, the Russia-Chinese War of 1904, and Grandpa just bought a brand new whole set of Civil War books. I don't know how many volumes it was, but I used to look at them. They studied nature, and I studied war. And one morning, Ted and I slept upstairs, and incidentally, when you went upstairs in Grandma's house with a little lamp, them shadows on the wall, it was always very spooky going up there. And boy, we'd beat it up there and hop in bed. Grandma would say, you boys been in bed? Yeah, we're in bed, Grandma. And she wasn't going to come upstairs. But at any rate, next morning, I gets up early. I looks over there. Ted's gone. He had already went with Dave and Harv and Ed Myers to put wood out here to these fireplaces, and that's what I thought I was going to do. You know, I was a big help carry 1 piece of wood or 2. At any rate, we went and go with the boys. Grandma said, where Mitt you been going? I said, I'm going out to play. She said, you stay here. The washing machine in them days, it had an automatic washer. If you stood there with a stick and sat on there, you pumped the washing machine. And so we'd do washing, and then when we got done with that, then it was blackberry picking time, raspberries and gooseberries, and I still don't like gooseberries. And one of these, then one day, Jackie, Grandpa had a pet monkey named Jackie. And Grandpa would have him on the shoulder, and Jackie got in the house. Got upstairs in Grandma and Grandpa's bedroom, and back then they had, all the pillows were feather pillows, and Jackie took them pillows and shredded them and threw the feathers all over. Grandma come downstairs, she got that broom, she went back upstairs and finally got the monkey out of there. Well, Then remember, Grandpa was the official weather forecaster for Boone County for many years. And at 9 o'clock every morning, he called in the weather report. We had a party line in there. That was 3 shorts and a long was our ring. And when Grandpa would go get the telephone, naturally the girls in the neighborhood would be talking on the phone. If you wanted to get the local news, you just picked up the receiver and listened in. But Grandpa would tell him to step off the line so he could call the weather report in, which he did. He did let him. He had a great big battery-powered radio. He had 6 or 5 radio stations on that: KSO, WHO, KRNT, WMT, and WNAX. And he was a great listener of H.V. Kaltenborn. And of course, that was during when the war was coming along in Europe in the middle of the late 30s when Hitler was coming to power. And he was always very concerned about that. We closed the park up at about 9:30 or 10 o'clock. And Grandpa was always very nice of letting us go with him. This place at night with no light is very dark. And remember, we're small boys. Grandpa had a big 5-cell flashlight he'd take with, and we'd tail along. He'd shine it up into the trees. He'd say, what kind of owl is that? Heck, I don't know. I guess feathered owl is all that. And Grandpa, he'd whoo-hoo, kind of hoot like an owl. And the owl would answer back. And whippoorwills, and hawk would dive down. And that was really an adventure, closing the park with Grandpa. Toward the end of August, we had a great big crabapple tree sitting right out in the backyard. When the leaves started turning yellow and the apples started falling from the tree, that meant it was time to go back to school. And our whole summers were gone. One last story, and I've never forgot it. My wife's uncle used to work for Grandpa. Harv Miller was his name. He had a boy named Robert that was born with a birth defect. And he walked like this. Well, I didn't know that he had a birth defect. And Harv pulled up one day in his Model A, and Robert got out. And of course he started walking like he did. I thought he was just pretending. And I started laughing at him. And I just laughed. It was the only time Grandpa ever hit me. He had a walking stick. And he swatted me right across the shoulder. Put me down on one of my knees. I turned around and I said, Grandpa, what'd you do that for? And he said, don't you know that Robert can't walk right? I said, no, I didn't know that. And he said, remember, little Vernon, you never laugh at anybody less fortunate than yourself. He said, remember that. Never laugh at anybody less fortunate for yourself. And with that, I want to thank Mark Peter and Mark Hyman for the fine job they're doing out here in the Legend. This wouldn't have ever took place if it hadn't been them for these two men. And this great park system with two fine young men like there is here in the Legend State Park. This park system in Iowa just can't do anything but get better. And I'll tell you, they're two fine young men. Thank you.
Thanks, Lou. We're going to conclude the ceremony today with America the Beautiful by the Boone Municipal Band again. And then there's going to be lunch available just to the north of the shelter here. It's $3.50 a plate, and just pay as you go through, and I'm sure we're going to have plenty of food. So here's the Boone Municipal Band again. Thank you again, everyone, for coming, and I'm sure if you want to hang around even after lunch and visit with some of the people, and I'm sure Vern will have some more stories. There's going to be some historical hikes available for anyone that would like to go on them. It'll be led by Mark Edwards and Mark Roberts and Carl Youngblood. So those will start at 1 o'clock from the shelter here if anyone's interested. Thanks again for coming.
What, honey?
It wasn't a Dalmatian. I got to kind of what was going on. We all got out of the camper to pull our family out. And she looked.
I know what I do.
Go walk in the mud, Kate. You walked in the mud. Oh no. Look at your shoes.
Please stand for the playing of the Star Spangled Banner by the Boone Municipal Band. It's under the direction of Mr. David Richardson. Welcome to Legend State Park. For some of you, this may be the first time here. For others, I'm sure you've been here many times, and that's why you're here today. I'm going to introduce the speakers up here. First of all, myself, I'm Mark Plymale, the park ranger. I've been here since July of 1994. I arrived just in time to do some cleaning up of the 93 flood. Also, we have Michael Carrier. He's the administrator for Parks, Recreation, and Preserves Division of the DNR. Jim Scheffler, who is executive officer for the Parks Program Administration Bureau. And Vern Condon, who is a long-time resident of Boone, grandson, of Carl Fritz Henning, and also Bobby Fritz Henning, who came all the way up from Alabama to be involved in the ceremony. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Michael Carrier, Division Administrator for Parks, Recreation, and Preserves.